Jae Crowder to the rescue? The Sacramento Kings have brought in some veteran wing help that was already needed and is now desperately needed after the bad news today that Trey Lyles and DeMar DeRozan are once again hurt. Jeremiah Salmonson, a Sacramento Kings beat writer for SRS, joins me to break it all down and talk about how this roster can be fixed without some trades and moves. It's all right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. And like I said, we got more bad news today involving Sacramento Kings injuries. I will read for you verbatim the press release about Trey Lyles and DeMar DeRozan today. This is directly from the Kings. Kings forward Trey Lyles exited the game in the second quarter against the Oklahoma City Thunder on Monday, November 25th, due to calf soreness. An MRI imaging revealed a grade 1 right calf strain. He will be listed as out going forward and will be reevaluated in 3 to 4 weeks. Kings guard/forward DeMar DeRozan experienced lower back muscle inflammation after the Oklahoma City Thunder game on Monday, November 25th. He will be listed as out tomorrow versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. Further updates will be provided as necessary. So this Kings team still banged up, can't have nice things. Apparently just can't get right, can't get healthy. No DeMar tomorrow night against the Minnesota Timberwolves. It'll be the second time the Kings are playing the Timberwolves without DeMar. And then Trey Lyles, another of just lingering injury issues, really, since he signed his contract extension at the end of the playoff season 2 years ago, or around 2 years ago now for the Sacramento Kings. So some disappointing news, but don't you worry. Reinforcements are on the way, according to ESPN's Shams. The Kings are close to bringing in Jae Crowder. They worked out Jae Crowder over the offseason around training camp time. They're bringing him in to provide some veteran wing depth. And instead of me diving into my thoughts on this right now, I thought, why not be joined by someone who's never been on the podcast before? Jeremiah Salmonson covers the Sacramento Kings. He's at every single home game for SRS. You can read his work and check out his work over there. He's also a podcast host like myself who covers the Sacramento Kings. So Jeremiah and I are going to talk about these injuries, talk about the Jae Crowder edition, and talk about this roster, the problems that they have, and whether or not things can be fixed without Monte McNair going out and making more moves. So please enjoy my conversation with Jeremiah Salmonson. It's been a long time coming. Excited for a first-time guest here on the Locked On Kings podcast. I have a feeling it's the first time of many times. He's a beat writer covering the Sacramento Kings for SRS. You also can hear him hosting the 3 in the Paint podcast. Jeremiah Salmonson joining me here on Locked On Kings for the first time, Jeremiah. And wouldn't you know it, we got plenty to talk about on today's podcast. Before we dive in, welcome, my friend. You've been covering the Kings for a long time, gotten to know you over the years, sitting in the media area together inside the Golden One Center. So it's a pleasure to finally have you on.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Matt, and thanks for having me on. And yeah, you're right. It's a day full of news. Nothing, the typical Tuesday, full news day for the Kings, even an off day.
So there's no right order to do this in. We'll just start with the injury news to start with. Trey Lyles hurt his calf again. He's out 3 to 4 weeks minimum, or he'll be reevaluated in 3 to 4 weeks. So another setback for Trey, who has been dealing with on and off injury issues since the really since he signed his new contract with the Sacramento Kings. He started last season with injury issues as well. It's just not been the same guy. And he's been pretty inconsistent when healthy for the Sacramento Kings as well. And then some back muscle inflammation for DeMar DeRozan, who after 3 games back in which the Kings went 0-3, he's going to be out tomorrow night against the Minnesota Timberwolves. So whatever order of those two you want to talk about, I guess let's start with Trey Lyles, because he looked so good for the Kings in those games that DeRozan and Sabonis specifically were out. And then those guys came back and Trey was not only not playing well, he wasn't even shooting the basketball really. What do you make of the up and down season that Trey has had and now another injury for him?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously concerning for him and the trajectory of his career, right? Like just the fact that the most recent history, he just hasn't really been able to stay on the court. And when he's been on the court, he seemingly struggled shooting after what was such a great season a couple seasons ago for the Kings. And he was really a huge spark for them offensively and providing good defensive minutes too. So, you know, the Trey injury, it seems to me the one that's going to impact the here and now the most. DeMar, I mean, obviously this back thing is, I said this like when it happened, like it doesn't seem like the type of thing that's just going to go away. It seems like it's going to be a maintenance thing the rest of the season. Who knows? Maybe at least to the All-Star break. So that's seemingly coming true, which is unfortunate. So, I mean, the Kings have to figure it out, right? Because obviously you never want to be down a man or down 2 men. Obviously they've been dealing with Domantas Sabonis injuries, DeMar DeRozan injuries. Malik Monk's been hurt. He obviously came back the other night, but now Trey Lyles hurt again. So they got to figure it out. And Mike Brown and the staff is going to have to come together, figure out rotations that work with the group that they have. But yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about both these injuries. Obviously, Trey's an extended injury. DeMar, who knows? Again, we don't hear a lot from the Kings injury-wise, so we're not really ever probably going to get a good look into what this really is. But I think this is going to be a maintenance thing, and I think it's going to be pretty common for him to be ruled out of games moving forward. And until he really plays a stretch and we see him kind of back to his normal self, I think that's just what we're going to be in for. So,
and one of the advantages of having DeRozan and what DeRozan's made a career out of is staying healthy and playing a vast majority of the games. Now, even if this back issue lingers, hopefully it's not severe enough for him to miss a significant portion of games. He should still play, I imagine, in like at least the 70s range, which is pretty common for every season of his career. But I mean, I talked about this with DeRozan in his introductory press conference when the Kings first brought him in. He prides himself on being available, right? And he shared with all of us the reason why he joined the Sacramento Kings was because he thought it was his best chance to win. Well, the Kings aren't winning right now, right? They're 8-10. They look like they're lost. And unfortunately, the inconsistencies on the court are only going to continue if you're inconsistently in and out of the lineup because of these lingering back issues. So you have to feel for the guy. And while I don't think that age has ever really been an issue for DeMar DeRozan, a 35-year-old dealing with a back injury is probably a little bit different than a 26-year-old dealing with a back injury.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Like, he's as the old saying would go, he's no spring chicken anymore. So, it's kind of the nature of things. And like you said, I still think he'll play in a vast majority of games for the Kings this year. Like, it doesn't seem like he's going to have any stretches where he's out for 2 weeks or anything like that. But who knows what the severity of this, right? And like, it was back spasms, and then it was tightness, and now it's muscle inflammation, I believe is kind of the official word. So it seems to me it's some sort of maintenance thing here. And then, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, the Kings just aren't winning, and they didn't put together a good showing when they had everyone back against the Thunder, and then everyone mostly back against the Nets. It hasn't been pretty. So you're going to have to figure it out if you're the Kings, and you don't have that luxury of having a ton of assets to go and trade for a guy that you think can really anchor a position. And we're going to get into some of their news today later. But I think the injuries are definitely an issue for them, but I think it's something they can weather. And it's clearly impacted the performance on the offensive end. Clearly, like the Kings have no offensive identity. Like and that I think is in large part, they just haven't played together with the group that they're trying to throw out there, right? Like you've got Domas, you've got Malik, you got Fox, who've obviously played together, but then DeMar mixing into it, and he doesn't really fit the previous system that they had. So you got to kind of mold the offense around him without taking the other guys out of their element, like Keegan. I think Keegan has struggled in this offense. And so they just got to figure out. But I'm confident in the staff. I'm confident in these players. Obviously, their track record over the last few years has given them the benefit of the doubt for now. But soon here, come closer to Christmas, they need to have things figured out.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. And Locked On Kings is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to place live bets on the NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, college sports, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Well, even before these injuries, I think it was clear that this roster needed a little bit of help. So the Jae Crowder news today was not too much of a surprise now that we know the injuries, which came out after Shams reported that the Kings are close to a deal with Jae Crowder. It hasn't been reported that a deal is done, but if Shams is putting it out there, you best believe something's getting done here pretty quickly between both sides. I was a big fan of Jae Crowder 6 or 7 years ago.
Exactly.
And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to the guy, because do I think he can? In theory, the kind of player that Jae Crowder is, the Kings absolutely can use more of. Kind of a defensive-minded wing, some physicality, some leadership, some veteran experience, and in theory can be able to space the floor and shoot the basketball. So Jae Crowder, what we believe him to be or know of him throughout his career, makes sense for the Kings. But I don't think anybody's looking at this deal and looking at this move the same way you brought in Doug McDermott and going, that was the missing piece. There's the game changer for the Sacramento Kings. So I like it, but I think it's fair to be realistically kind of meh about it until we see him actually get out there and play. And it looks like he's going to play right away with all the injuries the Kings are dealing with.
Yeah, I agree with you on that for sure. It kind of seems to be kind of a meh move. I think it has a lot of upside. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, but I think one thing I really like about this is that it happened now. Like, it happened now and not at the trade deadline. Like,
I agree.
I think a restless fan base in Sacramento, if this happens on deadline day or whatever, or close to deadline day, or whenever they decide to get something like this done, I think it goes over much worse with the fan base than it does now, because now you have time to tinker a little bit, right? Like, you get a guy like Jae, and what has he got left in the tank? Obviously, he's 34. You said, like, you loved him 5-6 years ago. I was thinking the same thing this whole time. Like, yeah, this would have been great if you'd rewind the clock 5 years. So I like the move now because it gives Mike a little bit of time to experiment with some lineups, see what he can get out of Jae, what Jae can provide. And then, you can continue to look at where you can upgrade the roster within the constraints that the Kings have with their assets and their contracts and their status at the cap. So I like the move. I think there's like no downside, right? Like, very little downside. Obviously, you got to try something. And I think Kings fans will be happy that things are going to be tried. And so I think that's a positive move there. And I think there's really no downside to it. But like you said, it's kind of a meh move. We'll see really what comes of it.
See, I think you hit the nail on the head there, because to me, this move happening today, while it was probably influenced a little bit by continued injury issues, especially the loss of Trey Lyles. Like, as we've seen, this team has no like big man depth, and we already knew they had very little wing/forward depth. Like, it's Keegan Murray and that's it on this Kings team. Trey Lyles was kind of that hybrid 4 or 5 that the Kings felt, I guess, most comfortable filling in those minutes when Sabonis or Keegan were out of the game. Now he's gone again. So I'm sure that influenced the speed of this decision. But I agree with you about this happening now, because it acknowledges that the front office is seeing the same thing we're seeing, which is this Kings team has issues on both sides of the ball. You have your general manager frequently, and I mean frequently when we talk to him in press conferences over the last year and a half, saying, we got to get our offense back to what it was.
Yeah.
And you have a head coach frequently talking about defense this, defense that. The thing is, Jeremiah, both of them are right. Like, the defense needs to get better for sure, especially the perimeter defense. It's tremendously bad. But the offense is nowhere near what it was 2 seasons ago, and it has to be at least close to that level. I think the Kings have to have a top 5 offense to have any chance of making any serious playoff run, or I would even say winning a playoff series. They have to have like a top 5 offense. So neither side is living up to the expectation, but especially on the offensive end. So for Monty making this move, while I don't think Jae Crowder is going to be a game changer in either category, to me, it's an acknowledgement of what I wanted to talk to you about on this podcast today, which is, I don't know if this roster as is capable of fixing the problem. I think they needed, like, the solution, I don't think is in that locker room right now.
Yeah, and I mean that's tough to acknowledge, right? Like, but I think it is a realistic look, probably. And you said it, like, the Kings have to have a top 5 offense. I think you're definitely right about that. And here's the deal, Matt. Like, Mike Brown was always known as like a defensive guy, right? Like his whole career, he's kind of been the defensive guy. He comes to the Kings and he has a personnel mismatch with the way that he coached, right? And what he made his name in coaching for, right? He didn't really have the personnel in Sacramento to be that defensive team, right? It's just you weren't getting it with the personnel that you had in Sacramento then, and continues to be now. So what happened those first few years? They had an identity with this run and gun offense, just blowing people out of the gym, going toe to toe with the likes of the Warriors and playoff series, like fun basketball. The fans loved it, and they had an identity. And sure, like, there were games they just lost because they couldn't defend and their defense was terrible. And I understand that, but they can make improvements on defense. But I think it's the switch. It almost feels like they lost their identity and didn't pick one up on the defensive end. And so you now have a team that's kind of just out there floundering, and the coach is like, we need to hit more spray threes, but we need to defend better. And it's like, okay, well, what really is going to be the identity of this team? Because they got to find one. And I think you're totally right about they have to be a top 5 offense. I think they need to get back to that. Obviously, Keegan has really suffered, and the whole team has not shot well to start the year. And from an optimistic perspective, you're like, okay, the law of averages, it's going to change. They're proven shooters. It's going to evolve. But I mean, we're getting into a quarter of the season here and it's not changing. So at some point they really got to figure out what their identity is and what schemes they're going to draw up on the offensive and defensive end to feed into that.
This episode of Locked On Kings is also brought to you by BILT. For anybody who rents, if you haven't heard of BILT, you're about to thank me. Trust me on this. Earning points on rent is now a reality when you pay your rent through BILT. You don't even have to check with your landlord to start earning points that you can use towards flights, hotel stays, fitness classes, and even your next rent payment. I'll break it down for you. There's no cost to joining BILT. And as a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and your everyday spending. BILT points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones that you haven't heard of. There are over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world that you can redeem your BILT points towards. Points can also be redeemed towards a future rent payment and unique experiences that only BILT members can access. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question is, why not? You're already paying it. It's not like you can get out of that. So might as well benefit from it in some way. Start earning points on the rent that you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. That's JOINBILT.com/LockedOnNBA. Make sure you use our URL so they know that we sent you. Joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA to start earning points on your rent payments today. I have a dangerous question for you, Jeremiah, and I thought about it while you were talking there. And I'm going to do a whole podcast on this question, or at least a decent chunk of a podcast. So I don't expect the best answer today while I initially throw it out there, because I would have to think about this. But I wonder, and while I'm not at all insinuating that there's any kind of issue between Mike Brown and Monte McNair, I don't believe there is whatsoever. There's no evidence to that at all. There does seem to be a disconnect in philosophy just based off of what we're hearing from both sides. I think Mike is smart enough to know the offense has to be better, and Monte McNair is smart enough to know the defense has to be better. But clearly, Monte's approach has been offense. Mike's approach is Mike has blatantly told us, being a fast-paced, high-scoring offensive team that flames out in the playoffs every year, he has no interest in being that, right? So there is a disconnect. So the dangerous question is this. If Mike Brown wasn't both the first ever unanimous coach of the year in his first season in Sacramento and the guy to finally end this playoff drought in Sacramento, do you think he gets extended? Or do you think the Sacramento Kings pull a Mark Jackson with the Warriors and go out and find the next coach, that Steve Kerr? Not that it would have been Steve, but you know what I mean? That next coach that comes in and more fits the philosophy of what Monte is going for. It's a dangerous, terrible question, but I wonder if the context influenced the decision to keep Mike around and extend him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair question. It obviously needs a lot of thought, but I mean, you're definitely right about it to a certain extent, right? Like, Mike has done things here in Sacramento that in the last, in the recent, the history with the Kings have just not been done, right? Made it back to the playoffs. Had a fantastic series against the Warriors. If that Harrison Barnes 3 goes in, it's a different series. The Kings advance. If Steph doesn't have a legacy game in Game 7, it's also a different series. So, like, a series the Kings played really well, and could have easily advanced past the Warriors. So he did that, and he seemed to get a lot of buy-in from the players, a lot of buy-in from Fox, a lot of buy-in from Sabonis, Malik. There's been some documented rifts here and there with Mike and Malik here and there, but it's kind of very public, and they kind of squash it quickly. But yeah, I mean, there seems to be some sort of disconnect in the roster construction and the way that Mike wants to play on the floor. And I think part of that has got to be kind of what you're saying with the difference in the way Monty wants to build the team. But I think most of it is just kind of where this team has been at. And, the way that the cap in basketball works these days, you just don't have a ton of flexibility. Like,
right,
you kind of end up like the Suns if you aren't careful, right? With Brad Beal, Book, KD contracts. You can't move the Beal contract. Obviously people would take KD, but where's that at? So, like, you have to be careful in constructing these rosters and making too rash of moves. But yeah, I think it's a fair question. And about the extension part, yeah, I mean, if Mike didn't make the playoffs and, that series didn't go the way it did, I definitely think there would have been a question if he was extended, for sure.
Well, for the record, and again, this is going to be I'm going to do another podcast on this because I think it's a much more broad conversation. But for the record, I don't think it's a mistake at all that the Sacramento Kings extended Mike Brown. The Kings have had a horrendous history of coaches. He's just the third coach in the Sacramento era, 40 years to reach 100 wins, right? So remember the history a little bit, right? Remember how difficult it's been in the coaching carousel here in Sacramento. So
yeah, and I mean, Kings fans don't want to hear that, but I'm seeing in all the posts right now in the comments, like, fire Mike Brown. Don't go there yet. Like, who do you replace him with? Like, right. If you want to fire him, okay, you can think that, but who are you going to replace him with? Like,
right.
It's not like there's a bunch of proven coaches out there that are chomping at the bit to come to Sacramento and coach. And so there's got to be, this doesn't just take place in a vacuum. There has to be a replacement for him. And just with coach turnover, Fox, look, I don't want to say this and alarm anyone listening or be like some sort of like alarmist, but Fox has a decision to make. Like, let's be honest. Like, and I don't think there's any chance he doesn't resign. I think he's definitely going to resign, even if this season doesn't go particularly well. I think the whole thing with him has been a max money play, and that's just, so I don't really think there's anything. But look, you start firing coaches,
he's going to be pissed.
GMs. Yeah, like you don't. Who knows where his mind is at, right? And I think he's very happy in Sacramento. The fans love him. He loves it here. But look, like you don't want to make any rash decisions like that. And that era is hopefully done in Sacramento. I know, it seems to have kind of died off with some of the changes in the front office. But yeah, I mean, I think anything's on the table as the season progresses, including like trades with players on the roster. Like, the question is this whole segment, like, can the Kings roster be fixed? I think you're right. It's got to come externally. And I think anyone's untouchable except if your name's De'Aaron Fox.
Monty has work to do. Mike Brown has work to do. And as disappointed and frustrated as all of us might be at this point in time with this 8-10 start and the expectations that we had that were not just set by ourselves, those were set by the organization, right? The 50+ wins, the making it back to the playoffs, the winning a playoff series. This is all set by the organization, not by us. So all that frustration we're feeling is valid. But seats aren't getting hot, and they shouldn't be getting hot because that's the last thing the Kings should want to do is spin back into that chaos of turnover and a revolving door like they've had for far too long in this city. That being said, it is a roster issue. Now, I'm not saying that this team is not good. This team has a ton of talent. This team reminds me of like a pickup squad, and you're like, God, all these guys are really good. When are they going to gel together? They just don't seem capable of executing for on a consistent basis, a full 48 minutes and then multiple times in a row. By the way, full 48, it's a saying. It's very difficult to play 48 minutes of great basketball. The greatest teams in the league even have their lulls, right? But the full 48 minutes is a saying of playing consistently pretty much the same way. Look at what OKC did last night, right? They played the exact same way that entire game. When the Kings ran out of gas offensively in the second half, OKC kept on plowing through. Boom, they win by 20+ points. This roster, as constructed, I don't think has what they need to be able to execute on both sides of the ball consistently enough. That being said, the biggest fix that I could see outside of making changes to the roster is shots just start falling. Because Jeremiah, like Deuce Mason put this out, and I'm going to try and stall for time while I pull this up. But you look at the amount of names that the Sacramento Kings have that are supposed to be good 3-point shooters that are shooting horrendously this season, and not just shooting just shooting. We're talking wide open. Here it is. Lyles, 33%. He's shooting 26% on open threes. Doug McDermott, his only job is to shoot threes. He's shooting 32%, 26% on open threes. Keegan Murray, he's shooting 29%, but 19% on open threes. Herter, 29%, 26 on open threes. Monk, 27%, 31% on open threes.
Yeah.
Like, it can't be that everybody just suddenly forgot how to shoot the basketball, right?
No,
this will come back to earth, right? It has to.
It has to. And Leo Bia's Cowbell Kingdom made that point on our pod yesterday. Like, it has to the law of averages will eventually come back to mean something. Like, whether that's they get back to their levels before this or close to it, something, right? Like, they can't be this bad. And yeah, I mean, I believe it's Colt Goldsberry. He put out a couple days ago, like, the coldest jump shooters in the league. Keegan Murray, the fourth lowest efficiency on jump shots of any qualified player with 50 or more jump shots this year, like with a 0.89 points per shot. Like, that can't. He's a great shooter. That won't last forever. So you're definitely right. The Kings, the shots will start falling to some degree this season. But, like with a guy like Keegan, I think Keegan's a great example. Like, he's clearly putting max effort in on the defensive end of the floor, and it's translating. Like, he's playing great on that end of the floor for the most part. But that takes a lot out of your legs. And it's, he's I believe he's still in, people can fact check me on this, but I believe he's still also run the most miles in the NBA this year out of any player.
Ian Fox are at the top of total minutes played too.
Yeah, so like that's going to take a lot out of you. So I don't think that like there's nothing you can point to these guys, right? I mean, the Kevin Huerter downfall needs to be studied, but like that needs to be studied in depth by the scientific community. But other than something like that, there are like excuses to be made for other players on the roster and kind of explanations for some of these struggles. But you're right. It will improve. The question is how much will improve, and will it be enough to bring them back into a contending team?
So let's go down this hypothetical rabbit hole. Let's say all of those guys get to a fine 3-point shooting percentage, which let's say it's 33, 34%, right? We have higher expectations for most of them, but let's say like all of them get to that point, and going from the high 20s to the low to mid 30s is a pretty significant jump based off of how cold they're shooting the basketball right now. But let's just say they all become fine. They don't catch fire, but they all become fine at the end of the season. How much does that fix this team? Are we ready to say that that's the difference between the Kings being 8-10 and then instead being 10-8 or 11-7? Like how, if the Kings are just shooting average from 3-point land this season instead of ice cold, what kind of position do we think the Kings are in right now?
I think they at least have 4 more wins, at least. And that at least they might be, if the Kings are just like a more average 3-point shooting team, they might be like, they might have like 12. They might have like 12 wins. They might have 12 or they might have 12 wins. And a lot of that has to do with their competition. They haven't really played any good teams. I went through it the other day. Like the only good teams they've really played is, maybe you can make a argument that the only good teams they've beat is Phoenix, but that was without Kevin Durant. So
both games.
Yeah, right. So like they lost to the Lakers, which I think is kind of a mid team. They lost to Minnesota, which in the standings is a mid team, but probably a good team. They beat the Heat, they beat Portland, they beat the Raptors. Like they're just not Jazz twice. They just haven't really beaten a good team. So sure, they might have 12 wins, but that's against, I believe the stats are like the second easiest schedule in the league so far this year, or something like that. And going forward, they have one of the harder schedules in the league the rest of the year. So this team has a lot to prove. And I think if they get back to an average 3-point shooting team, it solves a lot of their problems. Because a lot of these games are close enough, right? Like the Nets game was close. The Hawks game was close. Like you hit 1 or 2 more threes and you're not really in that position in that game. And so, obviously none of this exists in a vacuum. Like other things will be happening throughout the game. But if the Kings can just get back to their shooting performances of a year ago, I think it helps a lot of their issues. And then they can really focus on tweaking what they need to tweak to become good, and not like, can we win a game against these bad teams in the East? Like these teams in the East are terrible and they're losing. And I mean, they got what did they come home to the Spurs on Sunday? Like after Minnesota and Portland, they could lose that game. They could easily lose that game.
And then the Rockets after that, who are fighting to win the group stage of the play-in or the in-season tournament. So nothing.
Rockets are much better. Rockets are much better than people give them credit for too. So like this little losing streak here could really spiral if they're not careful.
And this team has been so abysmal at home, and it's just so inexcusable and unexplainable. But we'll wrap up with this, Jeremiah. The ultimate like Monty McNair versus Mike Brown philosophy question. If I were to tell you, you could correct one or you could fix one, and it's the Kings 3-point shooting or the Kings 3-point defense, which one has more an effect on winning games for the Sacramento Kings the rest of this season? Either they fix their 3-point shooting and are better at 3-point shooting, or they have at least some kind of pulse defensively on the perimeter beyond, God, I hope they miss.
Yeah, right. That's really what it feels like too.
That's their defense. It's God, I hope they miss.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean,
I don't think it is. For me personally, if you want to think about it, and I don't want to influence your decision.
Sure.
The best version of the Sacramento Kings is offense. Like that's it.
It's by far the most fun, right? It's by far the most fun. And it's and to your point, it's the only one that's seen them have any success in the last 15 years. So
exactly. You have to get back to that.
Look, and I was kind of leaning that way, but at the same time, like thinking to myself, man, some of those defensive performances are just atrocious. But I think you're right. I think look, it boils down to this is how I'm going to answer the question. It boils down to the fact they need an identity.
Yes.
And
100%.
so if that identity is run and gun 3 and you mix DeMar in there to hit his jump shots and don't stick him in the corner because he doesn't want that role. If you get back to that, the Kings will have more success, and then they can figure out what they need to figure out from there. But they need an identity.
I agree.
And they don't have one. And so, yeah, to answer your question, if I could fix one, it would get back to that absolutely mesmerizing shooting that they had put up in years past. You got Malik just doing otherworldly shots in weird positions. You got Keegan knocking down every open 3 that he hits. Fox can mix in a few. Domas can mix in a few. And, guys like Trey and things like that. Kevin played a huge role in that. You get back to that, that solves a lot of your problems.
I think that was the perfect way to answer that question is they get an identity. And to me, the identity of this team and this roster, don't overcomplicate it. This is an offensive roster. This team offensively needs to get going. And it's not just shot making. I feel like it's also just getting back to that offensive pace, right? You go back, people have been posting clips of that Kings 150-point national TV performance over Kevin Durant and the Brooklyn Nets. And that was kind of like the dawning of the beam game. And you watch highlights from that game and go, God, look how great the ball is moving. That's what that team was, and they have not been close to that since. And it's not a DeMar DeRozan issue because it was a problem last year too. So this team needs to get back to that. So I thought you answered that question brilliantly. Well, you can hear more of Jeremiah, of course, on the 3 in the Paint podcast. You can check him out and read all of his work and follow all of his work for SRS covering the Sacramento Kings. Jeremiah, this will not be the last time that we have you here on Locked On Kings, my friend. And I'm sorry it's taken so long for it to be the first time, but this is a pleasure, man. Hopefully this team can figure it out so we don't have to continue trying to fix them from our podcast standpoint. But I appreciate you, my man. I'll see you at the Golden One Center very soon.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Matt.